Welcome to Talking Property. Today I'm joined by Patrick Bright, who's been a buyer's agent for the past 20 years. Patrick's going to give us his best advice on how to bid at auction and buy properties off market. Pat, thanks for joining us. What advice do you give to a client that wants to buy a property that's going to auction on how best to win the bidding?
If you're looking at from an auction point of view, if a property's going to auction, you've got to look at the property and decide, how important it is to you, whether you want to try and have a crack at it before auction, at the auction or post-auction. Keep in mind also the stats sort of say, 75% clearance rates at the moment. They include what sells the week before auction and what sells the week after auction, what they call an adjusted clearance rate. So the reality is on auction day, it can often be as low as 50%. So don't think everything's going to sell at auction day. And also keep in mind, roughly only 20% of property across the Sydney market, for instance, is auctioned. Now some areas like parts of the inner west or eastern suburbs, lower North Shore, might be higher percentage, 50, 60% of property could be sold by auction, but across the whole spectrum, we're looking at probably only around 20%.
Okay, let's say, for example, we don't have confidence that the property will pass in. We think it'll sell on the day. We really want to buy the subject property. The agent, will come to this in more detail later, but the agent says the owner doesn't want to sell prior to auction. It will be sold on the day. Therefore, either you, on behalf of the buyer, or the buyer themselves, needs to turn up and bid at the actual auction. How should they play that?
You see all different approaches, and you see people even change their strategy midway through the auction. I do use all different strategies, so I will sometimes be the annoying $1,000 bidder no matter what somebody else bids. I'll chunk up, depending on where the market. So let's say, for instance, we see the property is fair value is around 2 million. And if the bids are at sort of 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, because I'll start them quite low usually, you might chunk up. Someone might be trying to, go on $20,000 bid. If we're way off, I'll just throw in a 50 or 100 and just see what that does to the audience on the nature strip, and just see whether they start having conversations. I'm watching body language. I'm watching to see who's having a debate or who's not got a planned budget.
Pat, these are great tips, and in your book here, The Insider's Guide to Saving Thousands at Auctions, you expand on all of these strategies about how to deal with underquoting,
yes,
high reserves, low reserves.
All those things, yeah, we cover all of that. Yeah.
I imagine your advice to home buyers at the moment is if you're looking for a bargain, you're not going to find one in the marketplace, and there's no point even attending an auction and getting ready to bid if a bargain is what you're after.
Probably not. I mean, there's not many bargains in a rising market. They might be able to get a good deal if you handle yourself appropriately. I enjoy going to auction, and I think it's often better. You'll buy better at auction. It's lotto. It's a lotto outcome. So I've been doing it 20 odd years. Pat,
do you prefer to buy pre-auction or under the hammer?
Yeah, great question. It's both, and it depends on the circumstances. So it depends on the client's motivation for the property, how much interest I feel is in the property, how unique the property is, or how hard it might be to replace. So as to whether we want to try and lock it up, and it depends on my client's budget, whether they can afford it. So typically when a property sells, not always, but typically when a property sells before auction, it's probably sold at a stronger price than the agent thinks or the vendor thinks they will get on auction day, or why would they bother? If they've got several buyers sitting around the same money, then they're just going to run it to auction and let them fight it out and see what happens. If they've got one really strong buyer, they're going to do a deal. A smart agent, a non-lazy agent, a lazy agent will run it to auction. The smart agent will actually work that buyer, because on auction day, this is the thing, auctions can't get the highest price. The agents will say, best way, it's the first biggest lie in real estate. You can't get the highest price selling at auction.
The underbidder sets the height at which it goes.
You can only set the second highest price. So that's just fact. So if they've got a buyer who's got a $2 million ability, and they know that they're probably going to pay that, yet everyone else is sitting at 1.8, 1.9, then you're not going to get 2 million out of that buyer if they take it to auction. So the smart agent will sense that and do a deal with them before. Yep. And sometimes they'll sell before auction because the vendor wants a bird in the hand and they've already committed elsewhere, and they'd rather have certainty at a price.
I often tell home buyers who ask about how to buy pre-auction, just because the real estate agent wants the property to go to auction, don't assume the vendor has the same enthusiasm for going to auction. They don't want an auction, they want to sell their home.
Yes, they do, yeah. So you've just got to weigh up which way I would approach it. But my feel over the years of, is about a third sell at a strong price, about a third probably sell at about fair money of where they would have sold anyway, even if they went on the market with a price, and about a third sell what I would call below what they should have got or fair money. So you've got
Or
to
the
be...
buyer's maximum price.
Yeah, well, it's a lotto outcome. See, this is the problem with the underquoting thing, is that if they pitch it at 1.8 and it's a 2 property, then they're attracting buyers with 1.8. And if they don't have buyers show up with a lot more ability, or who have been through the ringer of being misled and understand that it's actually going to go for 10 or 20% or 30% more than the pitch price, than well, I guess the bait price we should call it, that's what it is, then if they don't have buyers turn up with that awareness, then they're going to struggle to get above the guide.
Yeah.
And we see that at auction, and that's where, for me, you've got to be in it to win it. So with a client, we set a price before, we do our research, we do our comparables, we set a price before the auction starts, and that's it. So we either buy with change in our back pocket, or somebody else can have it. So we're never paying our maximum, and we're looking for a good deal, and we're setting our pitch price based on where we see value. Now, sometimes are those prices that we're prepared to pay well over what I would say is fair money? Yes, because I get a client who says, I want it, I got to have it, I don't care what it costs, sort of thing. And when I've got a client like that, we're going to auction, because it's unlikely we're going to lose out to another motivated buyer.
So as a buyer's agent in that circumstance, you're pretty confident you're going to own the property at the end of the auction. The key is to make sure that your client doesn't overpay.
Yes, you never know for sure. And I always give them that risk. And I say, if you absolutely want to lock this up before auction, then I'll work on doing that for you and find out the vendors, minimum lowest price they'll possibly take prior to auction. I'll work on doing that for you. Then you can make a decision if to make the offer or not. Challenge is, if you do that and you go through that process and you don't follow through, or it falls over, then guess what becomes the reserve?
Your offer.
Your offer. So you've got to actually do this carefully and do it strategically, and not be the first one throwing figures out there. You need to extract the figure that the vendor will take, rather than be throwing offers at them.
As a buyer, can you trust a seller's agent in this environment, or do you like to somehow cut through the agent by communicating offers directly to the vendor's lawyer? How do you handle that?
If you're uncertain the agent's passing on your offer, or communicating everything to the vendor that you would like them to, because that's their job, just to pass on anything genuine, then or CC. I don't try not to cut the agent out completely. I'll just send it to them and CC the vendor's lawyer. Then I just know that it's happening.
I think that's a key point, and that's what we advise people, is when you make your offer to the real estate agent, copy in the vendor's lawyer, and you know that your offer, whether it be through the lawyer or through the real estate agent, will get straight to the vendor in the format that you want it to. As a buyer's agent, where would you see your value component to the consumer? Is it winning the property? Is it saving them money? Is it saving them time because you undertake a search process on their behalf?
I think the biggest value I hear back, the feedback from the clients, is typically the unemotional assessment on value, the sounding board, all the points. When we give a client feedback after we inspect a property, I give them a pros and cons list. And there's a lot of things on my list usually they never noticed.
So you're bringing a professional atmosphere to a very emotional transaction, but just in reverse of what the seller's agent should be doing for their vendor.
Yeah, essentially, that's a good way to put it. A trainer said to me many years ago, a real estate negotiation trainer, it's never so much about the money, it's also the terms. And so terms are so critical.
So give me some terms that would bring value to transaction.
Well, settlement time frame. So one I just negotiated for a client, we ended up negotiating a 16-week settlement, so they have time to sell their property.
So you don't want your client in bridging finance under pressure to sell?
No way. So we know in a market like this they're going to sell. Now, some would say they're part of the problem because they're trying to buy without putting their property on the market. But these is going to come on the market once they secure what they want.
There's no doubt that a symptom of a strong market is tight stock, and we saw that through 2019, and I'm sure we will in the first half of 2020 as well. So timeline is one way we can bring value to a transaction outside of price. What's another, Pat?
Well, that's typically the number one thing, is people's finding out what the vendor... I'm always trying to find out what the vendor wants. Do they want a short or long settlement? And then can we accommodate that? Because if you accommodate that, price is important, but it becomes less of a headline on the negotiation side of things. So that's typically... There's also people wanting to rent back options, so you can negotiate that the occupant can lease back.
We're seeing developers that do a lot of this as well, aren't we? Trying to attract buyers with guaranteed rental returns, that sort of thing, as part of the terms.
well, for my mind, that's pretty scary. Brand new property with rental guarantees. If it's a good property, it shouldn't need one.
Stay away from that.
Run a mile. If you see a rental guarantee, in my view, the only reason they're offering that is because it's probably not a great deal.
Yeah, I always see release of deposit in the contract become a pivotal point too.
So yeah, good point. My view typically with a client is if that release of deposit's going to another trust account, agent's trust account for the purposes of a deposit on another home,
yes,
I don't see a problem really with that, and I've let that happen on transactions I've personally done.
Yeah.
But if it's just going to the vendor to do whatever they want with, then I'm a little less comfortable with that, because if there is a challenge with the deal, it's hard to try and get that 10% back, because remember, it's not done till settlement.
I think most good lawyers would take that position as well. Cooling off periods for finance?
Well, they're pretty, you don't get them obviously with an auction, and trying to buy a property prior to auction, they're not going to really give it to you, and understandably so.
Yep.
Otherwise, if it's for sale with a price, very common in the lending environment that we've been in the last couple of years.
Pat, changing tack now, as you've already outlined, stock in a rising market like we're experiencing at the moment is very tight. We've had historically low listing levels. What's your experience been with off-market transactions, and what's the best way to buy off-market if you're serious in the market?
With off-market, let's be clear here, it's 9 times out of 10 in today's environment, it's an unmotivated seller. So unless you're prepared to pay pretty much a nosebleed price for the property, and pay overs, in other words, I wouldn't even bother looking at them. The 5% that are being sold realistically at a sensible price who want to get motivated is, say, a vendor who's just bought. They really bought with a 6-week settlement. They didn't have a lot of time to go to a full campaign. They don't want to muck around. They know their changeover costs to move from this home to this home, and they're happy to take a commercially sensible figure quickly and move on with their life. But they're few in number. This off-market thing, it's an agent goes through, called in for a market appraisal. The owner wants a Disneyland price. And says, they think to themselves, I take that to market, I'm wasting my time standing at the door trying to get $2.5 million for a $2 million property.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll list it, say to the vendor, I'll list that. If that's out there, they'll say, if that's out there, I'll get it for you. That'll be their one-liner.
Yeah.
They'll then go to their private database and find a ill-informed, highly motivated, fed-up buyer who might just pay something close to that.
Yeah. So you see a real risk in buying off-market and overpaying.
Totally.
Yes.
So when I've got a client, I say to them up front, you want me to chase off markets? Not a problem. You better have the budget for it, and let's not get into a penny pinching price discussion when we find what we want and we're trying to put the deal together, because you're buying from an unmotivated seller.
Do you find that same leverage point that the agents intelligently use against the buyer with the off-market listing? If you want to buy it off-market, we haven't gone to the open market, therefore we're looking for a premium to sell it off-market as opposed to doing a campaign.
Yeah.
Do you find agents use that with pre-auction? Look, if you want to buy the property pre-auction, you're going to need to pay us a premium for it. Other than that, we feel like we're going to run the auction, and sometimes that's legitimate, in fairness, and sometimes that's a bluff.
It is.
Yeah. And these are the games that buyers have to decide upon when they're in the jungle.
Yeah, it's not that straightforward, is it?
No, it's not.
There's quite a lot of layers and variations on each methodology of sale.
Yes. So increasingly, you're absolutely right in regards to the advertising costs. A lot of vendors and real estate agents, for that matter, are looking to avoid these onerous and largely unnecessary advertising costs.
That's right.
And that's why so many campaigns now are commencing off-market and then morphing into a full on-market campaign if they don't sell.
Exactly.
So certainly in 2018, I would have said anyone off-market has said to a real estate agent, if you can achieve my miracle price, I'll sell, but failing that, I'm not going on-market.
That's right.
Increasingly late in 2019, we saw an explosion of transactions, not just off-market listings, but off-market transactions, meaning that real numbers were getting done. And in a lot of instances, both the agent and the vendor were just looking to avoid those advertising costs and being successful in doing so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was there. But I've just seen it morph more into the crazy number. So they're definitely doing a number of things there. They're avoiding the advertising costs. As you know, Pete, they're not going to create a digital footprint for the property by having it on the market at a silly price and then languishing and then looking stale to other buyers. So they're trying it this way, and then either when the vendor gets motivated to sell, then they'll stick it on the market at the sensible guide price that they know they can achieve. or they'll just withdraw it from being a off-market sale because that vendor's just not looking to be commercially sensible on a transaction.
Yeah, indeed. Pat, do you have any other advice today for our audience?
Well, yeah, it's pretty much be super organised. The amount of disorganised, the amount of people that come to me that are so disorganised and they've been looking for a while is amazing. It just amazes me how disorganised they are.
In what ways?
Well, they don't typically have a solicitor ready to go. Who I said, if we found a property that you wanted to buy tomorrow, do you have finance pre-approval, ready to roll, only subject to valuation? Most don't. Do you have a solicitor that we can throw this contract at tomorrow to review the contract? No. Do you have a very clear needs and wants list? So if you do see the property, you actually know that you found what you want and that you're not going to actually buy something that it doesn't meet all your needs and wants. Often I find with two people buying, partners buying, they often actually, when I sit down with them, I get their lists. Their lists are different and there's not often a lot of crossover, believe it or not. Apart from how many bedrooms and bathrooms, all the other things don't typically come into play.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I think you talk about having a solicitor at the ready. I think if you're going to buy before you've sold, you also need a real estate agent ready to go the day after you've bought, and photos of your existing property already done so that you can launch your campaign straight away.
That's wise, yes.
Because you can see people that do buy first enter into an 8-week settlement period.
They've lost 3 weeks to get to market.
That's right, and then that puts immense pressure on them at the other end to take a price, as you've already explained, that they otherwise wouldn't have had to if they were organised. So organisation does equal money in the pocket, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. And just this mental stress of the drama of it all.
Pat, your book was an excellent read. Thank you very much for that. And you've very kindly donated 10 copies today for anyone that wants to email in for a copy of that. So Pat's book is well worth a read if you are in the property market trying to buy at auction at the moment. Thanks, Pat. And thank you for joining us today on Talking Property, and we look forward to seeing you next time.